Cynthia Aker. I'm an actor and a writer, and this video is going to be about the reboot trend in Hollywood and all of that jazz. I've got a paper, it's official. Alright, here we go. The reboot trend. What is it? Why is it so popular? And most importantly, where does it leave original content creators? Hollywood has changed the industry of creating films and television to a degree never before seen by focusing on rebooting, reviving, remaking, and adapting old fan favorites and popular content. The reboot trend is not a new concept, but with new technology, more means, and an increased competition for broadcast networks in the form of cable networks and streaming services, these parent productions of the broadcast networks are falling back on past audience favorites to draw old fans and new to make money. Here we have a quote, and I will say who it is in the video. I'll put it on the screen. The ever-growing presence of reboots and remakes in film is a mix of branding, safety-conscious studios, and quality work based on older ideas but with new faces. Creators and critics wonder how this will affect the production of new and original content. As streaming services and cable networks reach the caliber of broadcast networks and their parent production companies / studios, they've started producing their own original content. They became beacons for the creation of original content, but as streaming services and cable networks become more money conscious and start to follow trends, the fear is that they too will follow in the footsteps of broadcast networks and reboot old content. So first, when I'm saying reboots and revivals and remakes and adaptations and all of those words, what do I mean? Because if you Google these words, depending on what sources you go to, they could have different meanings or conflicting meanings. So I'm going to define what these words mean and how I'm using them and how I think generally they are used. So first up, reboots. Reboots apply to serial works and are a new start to an established fictional universe, work, or series that discards all continuity to recreate its characters, plot lines, and backstory from the beginning. An example would be the superhero franchises of Spider-Man, which has been rebooted like 3 times in the past 2 decades. Each of those franchises are unrelated, separate universes. Remakes are the same as reboots, but only apply to standalone films. Insert example here. A revival is the bringing back of a show from years ago and continuing the storylines with the same characters and usually the same actors playing those same roles. Examples of this would be like Fuller House or Veronica Mars. In movies, these are just called sequels, so it's not really like a special name for movies, but revivals are specifically about television shows, or maybe you took a movie franchise and revived it as a television series, things like that. Adaptations. Adaptations are when source material is taken and recreated in a new medium. Think all of the like Disney animated fairy tale movies that were adapted into live action. Think books like Handmaid's Tale, which was adapted into a series, or The Hate U Give, which was adapted into a movie, or like larger things like any DC or Marvel movie or television series or cartoon that you've seen was adapted from the original source content, which was comic books and graphic novels. So those are our terms: reboot, remake, revive, adaptation. Awesome. Although rebooting has been going on for decades, the official trend started with Netflix's revival of Fuller House and was cemented when ABC got on board and revived Roseanne. New term alert: intellectual property, also known as IP, is any content, franchise, character, a script, rights to an adaptable material, life story or book, IP, any of that it's any content that a production company or studio owns. Production companies saw the reboot trend as a way to make money without spending it by using content that they already owned. So what are some factors that are included or make up the reboot trend? So I have narrowed it down to about 5 things. So we have nostalgia, brand recognition, fan base, technicality, and source material are the 5 things that I'm focusing on when I think of the reboot trend and what differs it from other trends that happen in Hollywood and other places. There are many reasons why reboots are or aren't successful. A few things are needed to make rebooted IP critically or financially successful. Yes, mommy? Okay, here's a quote from an article by ABC News. Few things are needed to make a rebooted IP critically or financially successful. Big name actors, a new take on the work, or just a fun nostalgic experience. The main reasons for success or failure have to do with those 5 things that I stated. Nostalgia, brand recognition, fan base, technicality, and use of source material. Nostalgia has to do with the sentimental response that audiences will have to a reboot. Was it popular back in its day? Is it something people will be excited to see return? Is it part of popular culture? Brand recognition mostly has to do with popularity. Jason Lynch from Adweeks TV said, "With so much TV right now, it'll be easier to break through if it, a show or movie, is based on property or a brand audiences are familiar with." So basically, the more popular and successful a show was back in the day, the more brand recognition it will have in the present, where even newer generations and newer audiences who've never seen the original show will still have heard of it or will still have heard of the show. For example, take the show Friends or The Office, which both have great brand recognition, and then they were put on streaming services, which then led newer and younger audiences to discover the show and made both of those shows come back into pop culture and become relevant again. So our third thing, fan base. Fan base ties into brand recognition in that a reboot will bring back old fans while also drawing in new ones. Then we have the technicality of a reboot, and that also plays a part. How well was it done? How well was it filmed? How well was it edited? Advertised? Did the talent do a good job? All of these things will be involved in the successful failure of a rebooted or adapted, etc. project. And then finally, you have the source material. The use of source material is one of the most important factors. Misuse can alienate a fan base. It can cause a show or movie to flop. And another trap that can come with older source material, think anything that's been dubbed like, oh, classic, it's a classic, is that shows and movies that came after that original content may model storylines or characters or plots or draw inspiration from those shows, causing these same characters and storylines to appear tropey and archetypal today where they were fresh and new back then. Here I have a quote from an article by the LA Times. "Series being brought back will pick up the old story with the original cast and characters, or reupholster the concept for present day, or look deeper and more darkly into material that was contemporarily fluffy the first time around." So now I'm going to go over some examples of each so that you get a better idea of what each of these things is. So reboots, I have 2 examples for those. For that, Charmed. The original Charmed first aired in 1998 and was one of the most popular shows during its time. It follows 3 sisters who find out that they're witches after their mother dies, and the themes of the show focus on family and sisterhood. And the reboot, which first aired in 2018, has the same basis as the original, but with more modern and diverse aspects that aim to please the fans of the original while also aiming to be relevant to newer generations and modern ideals. The show has immense brand recognition, and it was hailed as a 90s classic with the likes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. When the show first aired, it was one of the most watched shows, and the fan base grew when the original Charmed was put on Netflix prior to the reboot's airing. So some examples of how the reboot updated and modernized things based off of the original was like when the original came back, special effects were, by today's standard, they were very cheesy, but with advancements and the availability of technology that we have today, the reboots and its effects are done in a realistic way. They're done really well. The reboot also draws heavily from the original, but it's not a straight copy of the story. It takes elements from the original and it reimagines them in a way that leaves original fans still guessing and being interested and compelled by the story. But it also stays true to the original themes and messages of the show. And additionally, the reboot diversified its cast more and it incorporates more modern and more diverse problems and issues that face various groups of people, that face groups of people back then but just weren't addressed on television, and they're addressing it on television, but it still keeps the show fun and interesting. So Charmed is an example of a reboot that was done to please its original viewers while also pleasing new viewers. The second example is a reboot that did not want to please its original viewers. If the original viewers liked it, cool, but this reboot was aimed towards a younger crowd, a younger demographic. Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Love that show. Sabrina the Teenage Witch was one of the most popular shows ever. It first aired in 1996, and the show was about a teenage girl who finds out that she is a witch. It aired on reruns for years after the series finale, so new generations were continuously being exposed to the show. And when the show was put on various streaming platforms, the fan base continued to grow even more. And then additionally, Sabrina the Teenage Witch was adapted in other formats, and you had movies based off of the show that were made, you had cartoons based off of the show that were made. With the show's massive fan base and plethora of source material to draw from, it made the show a top contender to be rebooted or revived. However, the original cast having moved on, the chances were higher for a reboot, and it came. It came in the form of the 2018 It came in the form of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which dropped on Netflix in 2018. And like Charmed, the special effects of the original show, well, not as cheesy as Charmed, were still a product of the 90s, and so the new show uses modern techniques and special effects to immerse audiences in this new world that they've created. Sabrina the Teenage Witch was based off of a comic series of the same title, and the original comic and the show were more family-friendly and lighthearted and fluffy, while the 2018 reboot was darker and sexier and a more twisted version of the 90s show based off of the reimagining of the comic, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. While it had the same characters, the reboot was aimed more towards newer generations, and it alienated most of the original fan base who were in favor of the more family-friendly version. And that's okay, that's fine. Not everyone's cup of tea is everyone's cup of tea. Alright, what? I'm back here now. So an example of a revival would be Veronica Mars. Veronica Mars originally aired in 2004, and it's about a teenage girl who becomes a private investigator after her best friend's murder. It was a popular show because the lead was a tough, witty girl who solved crimes. And fans thought it was refreshing and different, especially during the era of shows like The OC or One Tree Hill, those types of shows. Though the show only lasted 3 seasons, it gained a cult-like following, which then spawned 2 spin-off movies that continued the story and tied up cliffhangers and loose ends after the show was canceled. And like other shows, new fans found it when the show was put on Hulu a few years ago. And then the revival aired in 2019, continuing 5 years after the movies left off. And since the show came out in the early 2000s, it was set at a realistic place. The show didn't have to worry much about like special effects or anything, but with Hulu's funding, the new season had like better quality technology and it was a higher quality production compared to the original show. So there's your revival example. So the role of adaptations. Why are adaptations grouped in with reboots and remakes and revivals? I will tell you why. Adaptations fall under the same umbrella of the reboot trend because they share many similarities with IP and how the reboot factors apply to them. Original source material can have a nostalgic factor, as with the 2D animated Disney fairy tale movies or popular children's books being adapted into other mediums. Like, for example, children's books, you had The Wizard of Oz and Paddington, Peter Rabbit, etc., or any of the live action Disney princess movies that were made. Production companies and studios choose content with brand recognition and large fan bases, like Harry Potter or Game of Thrones, and most importantly, the content has already proven successful in other mediums and has shown that it's profitable in these other formats, so there's a less risk when adapting these things than with taking a risk on something new and untested. Some examples of adaptations, like I already said, Harry Potter, the Game of Thrones, The Hunger Games is the example I'm going to use right now. The Hunger Games is a best-selling YA novel series. It's a book series. The Hunger Games is a best-selling YA book series that won multiple awards. It's a science fiction series set in a dystopian future, and the protagonist is a teenage girl who joins the rebellion and becomes the face of it as well. The book series was extremely popular and garnered a large fan base worldwide. The book franchise did very well, and each of the movies were blockbuster hits. They hired gifted talent to bring the world to life, and the movie stuck closely to the original source material, making the original book fans happy and new book fans happy. And so this franchise is an example of an adaptation done well. Avatar: The Last Airbender, on the other hand. Avatar: The Last Airbender aired in 2005. It lasted 3 seasons, and then it was an animated cartoon about a young boy who must master his powers so that he and his friends can save the world. The show was popular worldwide and it had a large fan base, and since the end of the series, novels, comics, and a spin-off series has been created. The show's popularity gave it brand recognition, and its massive established fan base made it a good choice to be adapted into a live-action franchise. So if you remember, the live-action was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. It flopped at the box office. It was hated by fans and critics. That movie is an example of a failed adaptation. Technicality-wise, the movie was well shot, and I'm not analyzing like shot choices or anything. I mean, the equipment was high quality, the film was a high quality production, and the effects were amazing, even though they made the bending slow. Okay, there are many videos talking about everything wrong with Avatar: The Last Airbender, the movie, and now Netflix is doing a show, and we were hurt once. Okay, so even though those two things about the movie were okay, the story, however, was greatly lacking, and the director took many liberties in adapting the source material, so much so that it changed the essence of what made the show so popular, and all of that was lost in the movie. Original fans hated it, new potential fans hated it and were confused by the movie. The movie itself made no sense, and viewers who had never been exposed to the source material before did not understand and were befuddled, completely befuddled. So yeah, so that not a great adaptation. So you can see in my examples of the reboots and adaptations, etc. I did not do a failed version of a revival. Did not. I don't know why, but don't have one. But when you analyze the reboots, revivals, adaptations, etc. that failed, those 5 things that I mentioned, nostalgia, fan base, brand recognition, I forgot the other 2, technicality, and what is the last one? I wrote this. Source material. Source material is the last one. Oh my gosh, it's fine. So all of this leads to, are there spaces for original content creators? Yes there is. I now will tell you why. Walt Hickley, a pop culture expert, said in this ABC News article, "You bank on content where people already have a sense of the characters. They have a sense of what the plot is, of what the story is." And so it makes sense why production companies and studios keep rebooting content, because it's expensive to create films and TV shows. It's expensive. Production companies and studios prefer to bet on content they know will work so that they can make a profit. LA Times says, "The high cost of filmmaking encourages conservatism, and there's a certain sense, after all, if a circular sense, in giving people what they have previously demonstrated they want." One way original content creators can work in the reboot trend is to put an original twist on a story. For example, take the CW, they have Riverdale and Nancy Drew. They adapted family-friendly comics and book series and turned them into dark and sexy, mysterious teen young adult shows. Or how Disney's Maleficent tells the story of Sleeping Beauty, but from the villain's point of view instead. ABC News says there's this hybrid emerging. Some writers are using IP to create something new, going beyond the source books. Meaning, you can use IP, but instead of just recreating the same stories over and over again, you take the IP and you make something new, which I think is the next branch of the reboot trend. For the last however many decades, for like the last decade or so, we have had reboots after reboots after reboots of just taking the same story and remaking it over and over again. And I think now, in this next decade, we're gonna step into part 2 of the reboot trend, this part 2, phase 2, where you're gonna see an expansion. Oh my gosh, my light. Where you're going to see an expansion of these. Whoa, okay, Mr. Light. I think it's gonna cut off again. So I think in phase 2, we're gonna see an expansion of these worlds that we already know so well and that have already existed, and we're gonna delve deeper. There is a Lord of the Rings series being in development where it's gonna go beyond the stories that we saw in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and it's gonna go beyond that. So things like that. You have the whole Marvel and DC universes where you have your stories, but now they're expanding outward and they're venturing into places and bringing in new characters that have never seen the screen and are not known by mainstream consumers, things like that. So I think that is the next step in the reboot trend. So I don't think it's going away anytime soon, but I do think it's going to get more interesting, and we'll get to explore new things. I do not think this applies to adaptations. I think adaptations will, you're still gonna take stuff and adapt it from the book or video game or comic and make it into a movie or series or whatever, or cartoon or whatever, and adapt it into a live action. This whole expanding the world, I think, is going to be more about stuff that we've already seen a million times. It has already been done a million times. I think those are the things that are going to be expanded upon, and we're going to go off from there. As for how the reboot trend affects the production of original content, Joseph Adelaine from the New York Vulture said, "There is little evidence broadcast networks are cutting back on their new series development budgets in order to spend outrageous sums on IP content, and plenty of original ideas are still getting greenlit. But network budgets aren't limitless. So a reboot technically means a few less pilot slots for new ideas. But any good concept that's passed over by broadcasters shouldn't have much problem finding a home elsewhere. That elsewhere would be streaming services and cable networks. Streaming services and cable networks rely on I knew it was gonna happen. This is the end of the video, so it's just gonna be a little bit dark. Streaming services and cable networks rely on subscribers to fund them, and so they're always looking for the newest thing to draw viewers to their subscription sources. And so like the reboot trend, like all trends, is temporary, and it's only going to last as long as it's profitable. An LA Times article said, "Cultures move in cycles or swings like a pendulum, but in either case, the audience will want something new, something newer." So trends go out of style, trends come back in style. Today's new will be tomorrow's rebooted and remade and revived, and there's always going to be something. There will always be a fear of trying something new, but there's always going to be someone who's going to take a chance on that new. So like, if you are an original content creator, like, don't give up, don't feel bad, because it does feel like everything you hear is like, oh, they've rebooted this show or they've remade this thing, but there is great original content that's also still being made. So there's that. And then also, like I said, I do think the next step of the reboot trend is going to go into expanding these already existing worlds. So if there is something that has always interested you, you could always go and create an original story within an already existing world, and that can be your original content. Like, there's just so many things that you can do, and yeah, it's really fun, it's really cool. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. If you like this type of content, subscribe. Oh my goodness, excuse me. I ate a bunch of goldfish earlier. You can follow me and or my cats on Instagram. You can also follow me on Twitter. I also have a blog where I post semi-regularly. I post companion articles to some of my videos. I post things about my bullet journal. I post book reviews and movie analyses and other random stuff. So if any of that interests you or whatever, so you can check out me there, check me out there. The link for that is also in the description below. And if you are interested in acting or the entertainment industry or bullet journals, that is what my YouTube channel is. So check out some of my other videos, which you will see on my screen. Also, this is the last video I will be filming in this bedroom. We are moving. So say goodbye to the accent wall and the symmetrical setup of the windows in my bed. Loved living here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.